My name is Simone Rodin Benzaken. I am the director of AJC Paris. As you know, we have several offices in Europe, and one of them is the Paris office. I am very honored to be welcome you here today and to open the conference with our first panel on one of the most challenging issues of our time, the issue of radicalization and counter-radicalization. And I'm also very honored to have these distinguished panelists here with us today. The problem of radicalization today in Europe is not only a problem for the Jewish community, but it happens that it is one of the first targets. But it is a problem for Europe as a whole, for European values. There are currently between 5,000 to 6,000 foreign fighters who have left to Syria and Iraq. Some of them have come back. Some of them have already committed attacks, as you know. And the problem of radical jihadism has also been a particularly deadly threat to the Jewish communities. So I will quickly introduce our panelists here today. You have their bios, so I will only say a few words about each of them. And then have them introduce for about 5 minutes the topic. I will then ask a few questions myself and open the floor to a common discussion between us. And then have the audience. I imagine this discussion will be interesting, so have the audience, you ask questions. I would just like to ask you to, when you do ask questions, to be as concise as possible, because there are many of us here. Many want to ask questions, and want to make sure that everybody has sufficient time to do so. Let me then go on to Mr. Haras Rafiq, who is the Managing Director of the Quillam Foundation in the UK. He was formerly the member of the United Kingdom's Task Force for Countering Extremism, and specifically in response to the 2005 terrorist bombings in London. And finally, our Italian guest, Mr. Imam Yahia Pallavicini, who is the Imam of the Al-Wahid Mosque in Milan and Vice President of Correis. Mr. Pallavicini is widely known as a voice for moderate and democratic Islam and has strongly denounced violence committed in the name of Islam.
I notice here that everybody today has been talking about, so far, radicalization, and nobody's actually named the ideology, and I'll name it. Unlike President Obama, who made a speech a few months ago where he said there's an extremist ideology at play, but he forgot to name it, and therefore other people started naming it, and it became known as in the States as Islam. The extremist ideology from within a Muslim perspective that is taken root is Islamist ideology. Now, make no mistake that there is a difference between Islam and Islamism, just as there is between social and socialism. Social is the way that we will all interact with each other, and socialism is a distinct political ideology which is left of centre. Islam is a religion that's practiced by nearly 2 billion people around the world differently, and Islamism is an ideology that wants three things. The first thing it wants to do is to set up a utopian Islamist caliphate and govern by their version of Sharia law. I say their version because Al-Azhar University, which is the oldest Muslim institution in the world, has recognized over 400 legitimate versions of jurisprudence. There are probably many more. The second thing they want to do is to spread that state across the world. Now, I can't see Belgium, the UK and Europe saying, hey, come on in, take over our states. This involves fighting. And the third thing they want to do is to wipe Israel off the map. Israel is the opium by which they fuel their radicalization and therefore anti-Semitism. When we're talking about counter-radicalization, we've got to be very clear. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the sharp end or the soft end? The sharp end really is, once we've identified when somebody is showing support for extremism, showing support for Islamism, what do we do with them? The soft end is, what do we actually do to prevent them being radicalised in the first place. I can categorically tell you, and I've worked with Tony Blair, with Hazel Bliss, Ruth Kelly, with Michael Gove, with Cameron, with governments and ministers around the world. There is no single government in the world right now that has a strategy that will prevent Muslims from being radicalised. Everybody is purely looking at it through the eyes of legislation and criminality. We need to move away from that. We also need to understand the pathways, and I'm happy to elaborate on that later on. How is it that somebody who has a partial grievance or a particular perceived grievance then goes through an ideological lens and comes out with a solution that means killing people? And what role does anti-Semitism have in that? For example, it's a complete fallacy that Israel and Palestine has got anything to do with ISIL executing 300 Yazidis. It's a fallacy, but they will use it. I want to talk a little bit more about the online space. First of all, I just want to say something, that it isn't possible, it's not the case that an individual goes online looking to buy a pair of shoes or a handbag and ends up becoming a jihadist. They have to be looking for something, or somebody has to find them. And what we're seeing is that the space where we used to see street corners, mosques, community centres, etc., has simply shifted and gone online. Purely banning and bringing down websites on its own does not work. I can tell you that now. Right now, there is somebody that we're monitoring that is issuing death threats against me and my staff, sitting in Iraq, telling people to kidnap us. We've had his social media account taken down 80 times. And every time he sets a new one up, he gets about 500, 600 followers within an hour. We need to produce more counter-narratives, and we need to produce more activism online. The other thing I want to talk about later on is universities. It's a key problem. It's a fallacy, again, that the only people that get radicalised to Islamist ideologies are people who are disenfranchised, uneducated, and really aren't integrated into society. 47% of British convicted Islamist terrorists went to university and have some form of higher education, and a significant number of them have been integrated. Prisons is another one we need to focus on. Prisons are becoming social incubators for radicalisation. And again, there are strategies that we're using in the UK and around the world. We need to form alliances in different spaces. We need to form social incubators. This is something that we're piloting around in some parts of Europe and around the US and other places as well, where we're taking people from the corporate sector, people from the governmental sector, people from NGOs, people who are Muslim, people who are non-Muslim, people who believe in the same values that we all believe in, that will come together and treat this ideology for what it is, a totalitarian fascist ideology. Also, we'll probably talk about the role that civic society has, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's been mentioned already, this isn't just for governments. Governments can't legislate their way out of this problem. And by the way, if we leave it just to governments, it's only going to get worse. Final thing I just want to talk about is that I remember going to a conference in Canada, and there was a great quote that I heard with regards to Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel was asked, what is a Jewish issue? And he basically said that anything that affects humanity is a Jewish issue. I want to just throw something in there, what is a Muslim issue? And I will quote the fourth caliph, Ali, who was also the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who said that we are all brothers and sisters in faith, but if we're not, at the very least, we're partners in humanity. Combating these ideas are within the Muslim traditions. We've been taking on this extremism for about 1,400 years. And I remember in 2009 speaking at the Global Forum of Combating Anti-Semitism, and I posed a question. And I posed this question at the EU in front of a working committee a few weeks ago. Is anti-Semitism becoming the default position for Western Muslims under the age of 40? We need more empirical evidence, but I can tell you that certainly, perhaps maybe some of our panelists may agree or may not, but from my anecdotal experience within the communities, it certainly is. And that's something we need to combat, and we all need to work together on that. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that gave us a lot of food for thought and a lot of food for discussion. Imam, thank you very much.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to thank the AJC for this kind invitation, and Executive Director David Harris and Lisa Billig as a representative of the AJC in Italy. I'm trying to present very briefly some points as a provocative approach for discussions. And the first thing I would say is that we have to probably try to define what is the anti-Semitic or anti-Judaic narrative. But be very clear that it is a hate speech narrative. The problem is how far will we be going to define the hate speech? And this is a very important issue because there is some speculation on a juridical, political, and cultural viewpoint on how, if it is it still a hate speech, or is it, how far is it, will it be a hate speech, and how far there is an ambiguity in having the opportunity to speak against Israel, Judaism, or Semitism, and not being in the category of a hate speech. And this is a very delicate situation, and according to my viewpoint, this is one of the reasons of the increase of anti-Semitism, because it is not clear that the narrative of any kind of a narrative against anti-Semitism is hate speech. Because the ambiguity behind is the narrative of having a freedom of opinion and expression. And so according to some European and Western institutions and even cultural opinion makers, speaking critically of Jews or of Israel is not necessarily a hate speech. And there is where the ambiguity starts. But I'll go further on this. The other question is counter-narrative love speech? And this is something else that I want to stress. According to my viewpoint, it is not. Because we have been witnessing too much of peace, love, new agey syncretism that seems to be the solution for hate speech, and it is nonsense. It is not consistent to a spiritual, religious, cultural, Western, Eastern viewpoint. It's just an emotional thing that is never solving and facing the concrete and very serious issues on anti-Semitism. And the last question is why is it increasing, unfortunately? Now, according to my viewpoint, it is increasing because we do not have, according to this roundtable, a clear aspect of what is the Islamist propaganda and what is the Islamist agenda. Of course, it is easy for now to say that their hate speech has as a narrative, as it was very well mentioned by Rafik, a exclusivism, a apologetic interpretation of their identity as the exclusive identity for the world humanity, something which was very similar to the Nazi ideology. They create on traditional basics a unique, exclusive ideology for the whole world, and any other kind of interpretation has to be destroyed. So there is only one identity for the humankind. And so according to the European dimension, it is going against any kind of pluralism. So no human rights, no dignity, no truth. And there is where any other person who does not believe according to their viewpoint is the evil. And so what happens now is that the new situation is that the European institutions are thinking that in order to counter the problem of the jihadi Salafi Islamists in Syria, let's dialogue with the political radical Muslims who are less problematic than the terrorists. And this is the ambiguity and the lack of a vision of the reality, because at the end of the time, in having the dialogue with the Ikhwanis or with the political Islam is just having somehow another kind of dialogue, empowering a political interpretation of Islam, which is probably not so violent as the others, as the jihadi Salafis, but it's only a more moderate, radical Islamist political interpretation exclusive of the Nazis of ISIS. So this is the reason why, according to my viewpoint, it is increasing. Because in somehow you are, not you, the European institutions and the European society is empowering some ideological interpretations that do not go so far according to a very aggressive speech, but they are more sophisticated. It is a hate speech against anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism, and even against any other kind of interpretation of Western philosophy or of other religious dimension, even within Islam, but it is always according to the same agenda.
Can I? Sorry, it's just that I want, because I'm looking at the watch,
yes,
and it is unfortunately moving forward. Can I just ask you to quickly wrap up, and then maybe we can get the discussion going afterwards.
The last point, the last example I unfortunately have to mention is the question of dialogue and peace. Because there again, there is a very sophisticated and not honest approach. Because now the new narrative of some radical political Islamist movements is, we are not pretending anymore to be the exclusive interpretation. Let's dialogue with the West. Let's dialogue with the Christians. Let's have dialogue with the Christians against the Jews. And so dialogue and democracy and freedom of expression is used as a new way to be empowered, always against something else, which is an anti-Semitic and Jewish and anti-Israeli perception. And so having this in mind, this is the way, the narrative, where the approach that we are witnessing in our times here in Europe. And the risk is that Europe might have not an ISIS-oriented Islamic empowerment, but might have a radical political Ikhwani interpretation as an interlocutor. And if this happens, the true values of Europe, the true values of Islam, the true values of pluralism, and the true values of Judaism and Israel are under a threat. And this is our challenge, our common challenge, and also our responsibility in order to have the knowledge of their narrative and then develop a strategy as a counter-narrative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The first question I have actually came very much from the discussion here. It's the idea of the preventing young people to radicalize in the first place. Are there things that exist? Are there pilot projects that exist? Are there things that are done by specific communities, by specific organizations that you know of that exist in Europe that we should look at, that we should fund, that governments should look at? What are things that we can do, that governments can do, that non-governmental actors can do, and frankly also that communities can do? Maybe I'll start with Haras.
Yeah, absolutely. In the UK, there is a new piece of legislation that's come out called the CTS Bill, the Counter-Terrorism and Security Bill. What that means is that it is now mandatory and statutory for all frontline institutions within the UK, and that includes schools, universities, the National Health, all of the institutions to actually do their bit in identifying radicalisation and extremism. What the bill doesn't do is tell them how they should do that and what they should do with it. But I'll come on to that, and that's something perhaps a new government will look at next week or thereafter. Each single person, a young Muslim child, has contact with different people within society. I remember, you all probably heard the story of 3 girls from London who went to join ISIL from Bethnal Green, and her father was in a photograph with a teddy bear, looking very, very sincere, and I believe he was sincere. He wanted his daughter to come back. What we didn't see until afterwards is photographic and video evidence of him taking his daughter when she was 13 to marches where they were burning flags, where they were propagating Islamist ideology. Families, therefore, have the role to play. One of a number of things that we're doing is, and other organisations are doing as well, is going out to schools, training teachers, looking at most schools in Europe know what to do if somebody's being racist. Most schools in Europe know what their processes are if somebody's being expressing fascist ideas. But when they come to Islam, they say, well, you know, it's not a problem because this is a religion. What we're doing is, and what other organisations are doing, is teaching and training teachers to identify some of the views that these people will share, young kids. And it has to start from young kids onwards. And actually then using their existing processes to try and get some critical thinking going. So that's one thing. We go to universities. People talk about radicalisation in universities. Of course, there are hate preachers in universities. When I was 18, 19, I might have been considered a hate preacher because I wanted to ban the bomb. I used to go on marches with CND trying to sort of instigate banning the bomb. Universities, if somebody's breaking the law, ban them from coming to universities. But if they're not, universities are a place where, in liberal secular democracies, ideas are explored. What we don't have enough of is the counter debate, the counter messages. So we go to universities and we debate some of these hate preachers. And there are a number, I mean, I'm happy to talk offline, but there are a number of programs. But the biggest program that we have that seems to be the way forward is building social incubators. Going into different parts of Europe and the West, looking at this problem locally and regionally. Is building a team, building teams in different areas, Muslims, non-Muslims, people who know how to fundraise, people who know how to implement projects, looking at projects, defining what needs to be built for different messages, projects, building the right resources. And Facebook and Twitter, Google, they've had a bit of a rough time. We do a lot of work with them around the world, looking at identifying what their processes are and what they should be doing. And bringing in other people and then driving these projects and messages out. It's only when we tackle these locally and everybody tackles it, understanding that we all have contact with individuals, that we can solve this.
Thank you very much. Imam Pallavicini, as a religious leader, maybe also have ideas for government and non-governmental actors, but as a religious leader, have you seen projects that are interesting? Have you ideas? What can be done?
Well, we worked especially in the educational field, so trying to concentrate on interfaith dialogue, which means at the European level, especially in Italy, I'm the vice president of COREIS, which is the Islamic religious community in Italy, one of the main organizations which is also working in cooperation with the Ministry of Education and with the Ministry of Interiors. So what we try to do is organize events in order to have an interfaith training for new generations and for the new generation of Muslim citizens in Italy and in France, because we have also the Institut des Hautes Études Islamiques in France, trying to train this new sensitivity of being a Western citizenship and being a Muslim consistent with the wisdom of our doctrine and being naturally open for a proactive, open-minded cooperation with diversities and with other religions and among the religions also with the Jewish community. And I feel that according to our experience, especially at the university level, the youth of Muslims and Jews, and even other kind of activities, public activities between Muslims and Jews in Italy and in France, can be one occasion to show that there is no prejudice and no ghetto and no conflict between the Jewish community of Europe and between the Muslim community of Europe. And it gives us also the occasion to bring a contribution to the European institutions and to the European society in terms of anti-Semitism, in terms of counter-narrative, but in a more proactive dimension. And the idea is, as we did many years ago, we organized imam and rabbis meeting in different cities in Italy, to do this in 9 cities in Italy, with the help maybe of AJC Lisa Billig, and in France, in 5 cities in France, where we have our representatives within mosques, institutions and organizations, and link with the local Jewish community, but organize with the AJC a vision of a narrative that can show how Muslim and Jews in Italy and in France, or at the European level, can work together not only to denounce the anti-Semitic narrative, but also to show the roots and the common good that we have historically, artistically and culturally contributed to give to the reality of society. And this will automatically, at the educational viewpoint, decrease the narrative of those who are trying to separate and go against our true identity.
Thank you very much.
Everybody can do more. Muslim leaders, everybody needs to do more. I think governments are just making some really big mistakes at the moment. I don't call them Muslim leaders, I call them Muslim gatekeepers. Because they have their own political agendas in play. Secondly, it is clear that Islamists, organizations that publicly supported Jihadi John Mohammed Amwazi, organization called Engage, organizations that were banned from the British Parliament for being Islamist extremists, an organization called I Engage, who have rebranded themselves as MEND, are being funded by the EU and are being funded by the OSCE. We, Quilliam, decided that we weren't going to go to an event that was run by the OSCE, because at that event, 2 people who supported Mohammed Amwazi on the stage, in the British press, in the media around the world, and people who were anti-Semitic extremists were being funded there to not debate, but to actually tell people how to define policy. Herein lies the problem. It's almost a little bit like take us to your leader. It's a bit colonial. We, as governments, don't have the true ability, the desire, the political will to identify who are the people who are best placed to promote our values. Just because somebody shouts, just because somebody is in the media, just because somebody claims that they're democratically elected, doesn't mean they are not an extremist, Islamist, jihadist organization. Secondly, if we just leave it up to British Muslims, European Muslims, Western Muslims, we face what's been happening over the last 10 or 11 years. We face the issue of polarization. By saying, here Muslims, it's your problem, you sort it out, we face the far right actually creating anti-Muslim hatred. And by the way, I'll go on the record now, I don't believe on the word Islamophobia. Why don't I believe in it? I'll tell you why. I'm a Muslim. Islam is a set of values. It's a set of ideas. I decide to accept those values and those ideas. I could decide to be something else. Therefore, in a liberal secular democracy, any set of ideas should be open to legitimate critique or legitimate interrogation or some form of introspection always from the person following those ideas. However, I can't change the colour of my skin. Anti-Muslim hatred is wrong. If we leave it just to Muslims to sort out in the West, it creates this polarization. And the final thing, Simone, I'll try and be very quick. A very quick anecdote. About 7 or 8 years ago, I went to prison and with an imam, and we did some presentations. And the warden said, there's a guy over there who is giving us some problems, Imam. Can you speak to him? He went in and spoke to him. 30 minutes later, he came out. His face was very pale. And I made a joke. Have you de-radicalized him? And he said, no. I said, what's happened? And he turned around to me and said, he's got a point. He's got a point. What had happened was the Imam went in with theology. The guy said, I'll see your theology with my theology. He went in with more theology. He said, well, I'll see you with that version of theology. Until the point where the Imam ran out. And what did he hit him with then? The intellectual, the ideological, the emotional, all count narratives that the Imam had nothing for. Imam's theology does have a role to play in actually trying to take away the justification that Salafist jihadists will use to promote Islamism, but They are only part of the solution and not the only solution.
Very important. Sorry. You have addressed the issue already, and because we lack a little bit of time, and I would like really to give the opportunity to the audience, and you will be able to express yourself at that point more in detail.
My name is Lena Posner-Kurci. I'm the president of the Jewish community in Sweden. I have one question. I've been the president for 15 years on a constant dialogue with my Muslim counterpart, so to speak. How, and you're addressing this issue, I would very much like your reading and help. How do we know that we are speaking to those who really represent the Muslim communities? Because it's not only one community. There are approximately 500,000 Muslims in Sweden, and they are not, it's not a homogeneous group. So how can we find people like you who to talk to? Thank you. I think this is a problem for a lot of countries.
Yeah, I will take a few questions if you take down notes.
Can I?
Sure, you can.
Thank you. I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Martens Center, which is the think tank of the European People's Party. And I'd like to come back to Imam Pallavicini and what he said about, well, the more political aspect of political party dialogue between European political parties and so-called moderate Islamist parties, the Ikhwani. And you know, in 2011, there was a huge, I'd say, temptation for Christian Democrats, which is one of the key political movements in Europe, as you know, to say, okay, we're Christian Democrats, and now there are Muslim Democrats in the Middle East. Well, fortunately, that enthusiasm has slightly subsided, but I can only encourage you to continue when you talk to these leaders, and believe me, I'm doing my work with my own bosses, to tell them that, you know, you're talking about very different things when you even remotely compare the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood and its spin-offs in different countries, to Christian democratic parties in the European Union. And there should be no preferential treatment when European Christian Democrats look for partners, political partners in the Middle East. No preferential treatment for the likes of the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think it's a very, very important message in this context of that debate.
Thank you very much. Imam Pallavicini, do you want to start?
Yes. Well, of course, I agree. The question of the choice of the interlocutors, of course, be aware that unfortunately the Islamist Ikhwani movement have been organizing themselves since many, many years in Europe, trying to pretend to represent Islam exclusively. So they are present in every European country with their centers and their places of worship and organized. The question, if I may say, is nobody, institutions, secular institutions or other religious communities can choose who is representative for the Muslim community. But what you, if I may suggest, what you can choose is what is your goal? And according to the goal, choose the interlocutors that have the skills to fulfill with you that goal. And this is very important because sometimes one chooses the interlocutor only according to what the market offers. But in this issue, anti-Semitism or the interreligious dialogue, the consistency and the authenticity of the training of the Muslim interlocutors is very important. And this links to the second question, because the important for me is what is the vision of free and authentic interreligious dimension in Europe? And the risk is that one wants to, as I mentioned, empower the Islamist ideology because it seems to be something like the Christian Democrats, which is completely wrong. Because, and even as an example, in Egypt, they run for the elections, and after the elections, they linked with the Salafi movements, and they proved that they are not able neither to be consistent to the spiritual and religious dimension, nor to a political dimension. So why is Europe being so naive in trying to legitimate those who pretend to be the legitimate interlocutors? Why the European institutions are neglecting all the other mainstream Muslim movements who, unfortunately, it has to be said, are less organized in the Muslim world, but even in Europe. And so there are two different situations. On one side, you have imams who are not trained, or you have exported imams who have no knowledge of the West, or you have radical Muslims. But you have also many others who are neither self-promoted imams, nor exported imams by Islamic embassies, nor the radical political trained propaganda imams. So there are these other organizations who have the difficulty to find their way and even to learn, if I may say, the skills to be efficient for the goals and the purposes that we can share. And as it was mentioned by Rafiq, you need two trainings. The first one is the theological training, because to represent Islam, you have to know your religion, as Suad was mentioning. Otherwise, you pretend to be a Muslim representative only because you are from a cultural foreign background. But on the other side, to work on anti-Semitism, you need to have the skills of the narrative, as it was mentioned by Rafiq, because it's an intellectual, ideological, psychological challenge, and so you have to link the consistency of a coherent interpretation of doctrine with the agenda, which has nothing to do with theology, because they are just using and abusing of Islam for their political propaganda.
Thank you. Horace, do you want to answer either of those questions and maybe react?
Just talk about the representation. One of the things that we've been doing for about the last 10 years is working with the CST, and I think Mark is here. Yeah, Mark's here. With the CST in the UK, and sort
maybe
of
you can explain what the CST is, quickly.
Mark can explain. The community... Yeah, Community Security Trust, Jewish organisation responsible for the protection and security of the Jewish diaspora in the UK. And we've been working very, very closely identifying who's who. What is it they want? What is it that they want to achieve? Why would you, first of all, want to engage with somebody who wants to kill you? That's the first thing. Why would you want to engage with somebody who wants to kill somebody if they changes their faith? Why would you want to engage with somebody living in Europe, we're not talking about somewhere, living in Europe, with somebody who wants to kill people who commit adultery? Why do you want to engage with them? You might do, I don't know, but that's a question you need to ask yourself. Don't give them legitimacy. Don't give people legitimacy, because there are many people who are political, as the Imam mentioned. They want to sit round a table and have these interfaith conversations with people saying how wonderful we all are, leaving the table and then cursing everybody. Move on to intercultural activities. Do things together. Look for people who happen to be Muslim, who want to do things. Common values is a word that's been mentioned, but common projects, common things that you want to do together. Halal meat, kosher meat, that's one potential. Post-mortem examinations. But what about sport? What about music? What about all the other things that people could do? Move away from the faith-based identity politics that these particular leaders would use to try and legitimize themselves. And the other thing is just find a partner who, we do a lot of work with Sweden and other places as well, in identifying who these people are. And then if you can identify who they are, you can identify what type of engagement, if any, you want with them.
Thank you. Yeah. It's very interesting. I think just a quick comment from my side, because at the end of the day, it's very much about values and about what common values we define for ourselves and what we decide to stand up for. Thank you very much.